Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a priest! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell-Gillard!
Hello and welcome back to a special episode of the Tip Sheet podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020. Joining me shortly will be my good mate Sixties and our special guest Bernie Gurr, who are joining me to do a debrief on season 2024 as well as look forward to season 2025 for not just the Parramatta Eels but the NRL too, as the landscape begins to change with expansion on the horizon. Before we are joined by those two gentlemen though, as always a quick shout out to the sponsors of the show, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Rowan and Parramatta. As always, big thank you to Greg and the crew for their support for TCT and the tip sheet. And now I will throw it over to 60s so we can get this discussion rolling.
Well, we're at that time of year, John, where it's time to look at the year that was, but also maybe a little bit of a look ahead at what the future might hold. And we really need some expertise with this. So who better to talk to than our good mate, Bernie Gurr. Bernie, thanks for joining us.
Morning, boys. How are you?
Yeah, really good, mate. Really good. We've had a lot of people asking about what you're up to these days. We know you're visiting here from America at the moment. So can you give our audience a bit of an update on what's happening for you?
Yeah, sure. Not a problem. Well, it's hard to believe, actually. I've been 5 seasons away from the Eels, and that time just absolutely flew by. But, of course, 2 to 3 years of that was COVID. So that was, sort of put us all in a bit of a standstill situation for a while. And then the last couple of years, I've been spending most of my time at our home in the US in California. We've been spending, as you know, Craig, a couple of months each year here in Australia, which has been terrific, seeing family and friends, and that's the reason for the trip back this time, to see some family and friends. But I'm still following, even when I'm in the US. I'm not doing any work at the moment. I was on the United States Rugby League board for a couple of months, but for some personal reasons, I had to get off, albeit that, they're a great group of people. Really enjoyed my couple of months with them. And I've also told them that if they need any help on anything, consulting or anything that they're doing around, trying to build the awareness of rugby league in America, I'm only too happy to help because they're a really good group of people. Other than that, just been doing some family things, some home things, and following the NRL very, very closely. Of course, I watch probably 5 to 6 games a week. So because I can watch them on the Watch NRL app, so I like to stay in touch with what's going on in the game, the trends on the field, and also very importantly, what's happening off the field with our great games. So, yeah, that's what I've been up to, mate. Playing a bit of golf as well. Very, very.
I think that's probably a pastime and passion that's shared by a lot of our listeners. Bernie, we know that you still follow Parramatta intently. When you and I catch up and chat, you still talk about us and we when you're talking about Parramatta. So we thought it was really appropriate to have a bit of a chat with you, albeit now you're a little bit, on the outside looking in these days. But let's get into the season that was. It was certainly not the season that supporters or the club themselves would want. And the Eels made their biggest decision early in the year with parting ways with Brad Arthur. So outside of coaching considerations like that, when you get to the end of the season and you've had the sort of season that the Eels have had, when it applies to any club, what sort of processes do clubs typically go through after a poor season?
Yeah, I think every club does a review. And I know, whenever clubs do poorly, the media come out and say they're doing a review, and people get a bit sarcastic about, that's great, all the clubs that are losing are doing reviews. But the reality is every good organisation, whether it's a corporate organisation or a sporting club, whether they're first in their business or competition in the NRL or they're last, every organisation should be doing a periodic review of their performances in all areas of their business. And, as it specifically relates to football, every club will do a review of their football operations. And obviously, the pencil is probably sharpened a little bit when you haven't had a very good year. So the clubs that are lower down on the ladder are probably doing more of a review. And that you ask what goes into that. It can be quite extensive. So, some clubs go into it to certain levels and some go into deeper levels. And there's a lot in a football department now that, the game of rugby league, I've been in the game a long, long time, and observing the game and the practices and behaviours of certain clubs. And, there's a lot more into it now. There's a lot more staff than there was even 6 or 7 years ago when I joined Parramatta. The number of people we had in the business was much more than when I was at the Roosters, for example. Every club now has a lot of people in the footy department. They're a much bigger operation. It's a much bigger business. But specifically on football department, the things you've got to go through, it can be very detailed. For example, you've got to look at let's start with the main, the showpiece, the window front of a football club, which is the NRL operation. You've got to look at, how did we go in our just fundamental performances. We Parramatta won 7 and lost 17. So they're going to be looking at, well, how do we play? And the new coach will be doing this. He'll be looking tactically, mentally, physically. What do we do in this year that we need to fix for next year? There's recruitment and within that, there's the scouting operations, and there's scouting at 2 levels. One's at the NRL level and one is the elite pathways, where you've got to have a pretty broad geographic spread to make sure you're getting the very best players from heartland rugby league areas and non-heartland rugby league areas. There's the salary cap, which of course goes hand in hand with the recruitment and retention process. They're reviewing the coaching process. The Eels have done their mid-year around the head coach. And, Brad's a friend of mine, and I was very happy and had a great time supporting him. But the club made their decision, and they're inside the building. So they made the decision to go in another direction, looking at their assistants. They're particularly looking at the high performance, and all this will be done, and where appropriate, the new coach in Parramatta's situation, Jason Ryles, will be getting involved. They'll be looking at, they're in the high performance area. They'll be looking at their strength, their aerobic fitness, their speed, all the scientific data around each player. They'll be looking at their fundamental operations too. Their travel, their planning, all the nitty-gritty things that you have to do to logistically keep a football club running. They'll be looking, of course, at their elite pathways and junior rep programs, the flag, the ball, the mats, and also looking outside at the Queensland junior rep program. Usually they'll also be looking at their wellbeing and education around the football department. So it's not just the on-field stuff, it's the off-field stuff. And the key on any of these reviews is you've got to be very honest, you've got to be very open, and you've got to be very thorough. And as I said a little earlier, I think the new coach, Jason Ryles, he won't get involved in every little piece of this because he's going to be changing things, and new coaches are entitled to do that, particularly in the preparation, the high performance side, and then the NRL team and how they tactically, mentally and physically prepare to play the season of NRL. So, it can be very thorough, but there's some of the areas that clubs look at. And, when you start going through them and understanding them, if you do a thorough review, it is quite an exhaustive process, but it's the only way to run any business I've been in, whether it's football or non-football. Unless you did periodic reviews of your performance, you're not going to optimise your future performance.
That's a really strong answer to start the chat, Bernie. And I suppose one facet of that review process, at least to us, would be the players that were missing. And Mitchell Moses only played 2/3 of the season. He missed 16 games, so it was a nice, neat cut-off number there, unfortunately for the Parramatta Eels. And the team won just 4 games without him. And outside of that, there were around 140 games missed by players due to injury, which is the equivalent of 6 players missing every round, which is a pretty big dent in the playing stocks. Can the Eels look to those facts as valid reasons for the results this season, and how much of that goes into that consideration?
Yeah, you've got to look at that, but you don't want to let it blind you to other issues that you may have. On Mitchell directly, like, this was Mitchell's 8th season at the Eels. When I came to the Eels, he was our first major signing, and we just thought he had such potential. And fortunately for the club, he's realised that. He's given the club terrific value. And then I would suggest in the last 2 or 3 years, he's even risen to that elite level that we always thought he would go to, where now he's sitting in the discussion with the Nathan Clearys and Jerome Hugheses and Mitchell Moses. To me, they're the Daly Cherry Evans, these type of players. When you're sitting in that exalted company, you're legitimate. He is clearly a huge loss, and it's not necessarily the great players when they're missing, it's not necessarily what they do, it's what it means to the other players. And there's very few players that have a substantial impact on the performance of a football team. And Mitch is one of them. He's one of those players, and one of the top, he's in the top 10 players in the NRL, which is, it's a magnificent achievement for him. So he's really gravitated to that elite level. So if you don't have him, you clearly miss him. And the one big thing is when Mitch is sitting in the dressing room getting ready to play, and the players look around and they get in the huddle and they see Mitchell Moses, and he's very precise in telling the team what he wants them to do that day. There's an immense confidence and belief. So, and I think we won 3 or 7 with Mitch, and we won 4 or 17 without him. So I think that stat tells a story, but it's not the full story, and you don't want to delude yourself, or any of us delude ourselves that was the sole reason. Like other players have been injured. Cleary missed 14 games. Monster missed 10 games. Pappenhausen missed 8 games. These are really good players in good teams who miss games. And even with injuries, you still need, and there's it's a fundamental in any team. You need to be an elite team. You need that defensive resolve. Parramatta, I had a look at a couple of stats yesterday, and I think they were 16th in tries conceded per game, 16th in line breaks conceded, 17th in missed tackles. And clearly that's on the bad end of the spectrum, and they're defence-related pieces. So, just looking from the outside, and I never want to be too critical of players and teams and clubs, because having been involved, I know how hard it is, and particularly now in the NRL, it's very, very competitive. And things that didn't, so the defence, you can be. I noticed this year they dropped to about 6th or 7th in attack this year, but they were number 1 on defence. Now, the reason their attack was a little down is that Cleary missed all those games. He missed 14 games, and that's going to impact their attacking firepower. Plus the fact they've lost a few good players in recent years, like the Kickouts, the Burtons, the Crichtons. These sort of guys are going to impact their ability to score tries. But Cleary's their key. He's their number 1 man, and when he didn't play, that's probably one of the reasons why they weren't racking up big scores. And the other thing that can hurt your defence is your attack. Now, that's sometimes sounds counterintuitive, but Parramatta's completion was very poor. Their kicking game was very poor. They were like 17th. I think they were 17th in completion percentage. Their kick, and when you looked into the kicking statistics, their number of kicks, their kick meters, all sort of things, and even their dummy half running completion percentages, they're all around the very back end of the competition. So when you don't attack well, the best helper for your defence is attack, and the best helper for your attack is defence. So that's the beauty of rugby league. It's a great game. It requires great attack and defence. But so I think there's some real issues around their defensive attitude, resolve, and sometimes their structures. And I don't, really blame Trent Barrett, because when you change head coaches, it's a very tough gig. And quite frankly, over the last couple of months, I thought Frank had the team, for parts of many games, mentally tuned into the game. Parramatta probably weren't an 80-minute team this year. So, yeah, I think losing Mitch is big, but I think when you do a bit of a deep drill, and I only drilled a little way down on some of the issues around injuries to other teams and statistics around defence and attack that impacts defence. They've got a bit of work to do to get back to the elite level, but the review and the analysis of this is that it's the starting point to, if you don't know what's wrong, you don't know what to fix. So, and I'm sure Jason Ryles is absolutely all over this.
Bernie, just moving then into personnel, the roster's not yet complete for next season. We've spoken about, some of the strengths that are still there, but what additions need to be made to really strengthen the squad moving forward?
Yeah, roster management is so difficult. It's so competitive now, and you can fall off a cliff very quickly now, because everything's so competitive, not just on the field but off the field, in recruitment and retention issues. You've got the related salary cap issues around that, but losing RC Reagan Campbell-Gillard is a big loss. I see he won the Ken Thornett medal, very, very deserved. Could have gone to him or Gutherson, but they were clearly our 2 most consistently elite players this year, and really, in rugby league parlance, they really had a dig every week, and that's what the fans are asking for. He's going to be very, very difficult to replace. He's a big body. He's mobile. He's imposing. He's still, I believe, one of the best front rowers in the league. Now, I don't understand why he's going, because there's salary cap issues related around that. So I don't profess to. I'm not critical of the Eels because I don't know all the information. It may be one of those tough decisions you have to make in a football club periodically, where you'd love to keep someone, but there's other issues around that, like salary cap and long-term planning of your roster, where you have to get started on a long-term plan, and unfortunately there has to be a loss of a very good player. So I think their middles need a little shoring up. I think having lost RCG, some of the other players that we've had in recent years that have been playing, as their third and fourth and fifth and sixth front rowers, have struggled at times. They're probably looking around for a good young back rower. I think we need another back rower. I think Tuolangi's coming along nicely, but he needs another off season with Jason Ryles, and I think he's a good player. But they probably need to look at a young back rower. They need a backup halfback /5'8/dummy half. They need someone who, when Mitchell or Dillon are out, and it's going to happen, they're going to miss games. I just mentioned Cleary and Munster before. Good players miss games, and you need to have that backup. Also now, that number 14 role, if you can find someone that can jump on the field, jump in at dummy half, has played a bit of halfback and 5'8", I think that's the spot you really need. And one of the issues is when you lose a half or 5'8", your kicking game deteriorates. And I think kicking is the most underrated component of rugby league these days. I think, behind good defence, you could have good kicking. All good teams have good kicking. So and our kicking game was very poor this year without Mitchell. Losing Sevo, if we do lose Micah, it's rumoured we will, but if we do, we'd obviously need potentially a left winger. We've got to look at that left centre position to tidy that up. I'm assuming Lomax will probably be given a crack at right centre. Yeah, Bailey Simonson. I think Shawnee Russell's developing. He needs a real good off-season, Sean. I like the fact they've got Eongi coming in at fullback. The use of Gutho will determine a few things. I think at number 9, we're really giving up. In that vital spine position of number 9, I think we're really giving up a few yards to the better teams. They have an advantage over us in that area. And of course, the other thing is, in a macro level, we need to make sure we have the top 30 spots filled and utilised. And I know you guys have been harping on that for a little while. You can't give up the roster management obviously drives your performance, and you can't be playing with 27 players when other clubs are playing with 30. And rugby league's a tough game these days. There's a lot of high attrition physically, so you can't be giving up any little advantage like that. You have to manage that.
So I want to tackle a negative, but structure it with a potential optimism then. Are there any players that you believe we didn't see the best of from 2024 who can return to form in 2025?
Yeah, I do. I think, number one, it's going to be a collective. It's rugby league's a team game. But, of course, your team performance is the sum of your individual performance. And if you've got the right attitude and tactics and strategy, etc., the sum of the parts, the total will be greater than that. That's the good thing about team sports. But one player that stands out is Junior Barlow. Junior is a terrific guy. He's a leader within the club, and we had a lot of injuries in 2024. So I think particularly with Reg going, we really need to get Junior back on the field. He's a commanding presence within the club. He's a leader. He's a great guy, Junior. I think there's still I've heard people rumour he might be on the downhill slide. I think there's still a lot of good football in him. He just needs to have a pre-season under the new coach and the new high performance team. I think there is absolutely a lot of good footy left in Junior, and quite frankly, the club needs him to be a big performer next year, because he's clearly the number 1 front rower in the club, and he's a leader, and he's a great fellow. I think he's a key man to get back on the bike and moving. I think if Sean Lane and Ryan Madison, they're 2 very experienced players. They know their way around the NRL. Sean's had a few injuries. I think that's really impacted him. I'm not sure where they're going to play him, on the edge or the middle. I think that'll determine on whether they can strengthen the middle. If they can't, they may play him permanently in the middle, which then ups the ante on what I mentioned earlier about getting another young back rower if he's not going to be in that mix. Ryan Madison can play middle or edge as well, similar to Sean. We really need those two. And, they've had their various physical injuries this year, but we really need them to up the ante and be leaders. So with Barlow, Lane and Madison, I've mentioned 3 senior players, and we need their leadership. We need them to set the standards along with, Mitchell Moses and Dylan Brown and Gutho, of course. The bottom line is all the players, they need to be, they're going to, with a new coach, it's like it's putting a new coat of paint on the house. It's refreshing. It's going to be exciting for the club. I think it's exciting for the fans. And I think Jason Ryles will be working very hard on getting all the players to refocus, recommit, and hopefully play more consistent football.
It was a all-round lousy year. I don't think there's any need to sugarcoat that. But was there anything in the team performances during 2024 that you did like?
Yeah, as you said, John, 7 of 17, 17 wins, 7 wins, 17 losses is poor, and that's not acceptable for Parramatta. And no one within the club would say that. And, the club has 716 points put on them, 30 points a game, basically.
Yep.
It's a very ugly picture, but no one's more aware of this than people inside the building. And no one's more aware of it particularly than Jason Ryles, the new coach. And knowing his background of coming from Melbourne and Roosters, 2 clubs that absolutely pride themselves on defence, effort and commitment, I think you'll see, and hopefully, an improvement there. Look, I like Telma Tuolangi. I think he's a bit loose in certain areas of his game. I think he needs another physical off-season to get himself physically prepared to be a good player. But he's got that frame on him like an Eli Katoa or a Nano. I'm not saying he's going to even get to their levels, but if he can get nearly to their levels, I think he's got that big mobile frame that you need in an edge back row. You need one of them in your team these days. So I'm really looking forward to his development under Jason. I think Jermaine Hopgood coming back. Jermaine played really solidly in the start of the year, got in the Origin squad, and we basically didn't see him again. So he was playing well to get picked in Billy Slater's Queensland Origin squad. We missed him immensely. I've heard him interviewed. I think he's going to gravitate into a leadership position within the club. His representative status will give him a status within the club as a very, very good player amongst the other players when they know he's an Origin player. We don't have many Origin players. That's a problem for the Eels. We missed his work rate, and I think we just missed his attitude. Like, he's got a terrific attitude to his football. So I think I'm looking at Tuolangi and Hopgood I think they were a couple this year that you'd say, even though Hopgood got in, the fact that he got in Origin and had been playing well. The other thing, I did think, like, over the last 2 months, Parramatta were never going to make the playoffs. So, 8 or 9 weeks before the season ended, everyone knew they weren't making the playoffs, and that can be a devastating position for clubs. We've seen certain clubs over the years where they basically fold the tent in many ways and go home. And I thought the efforts, not for 80 minutes in games, because we didn't have hardly any 80-minute performances this year, but, for long periods of games, I thought Trent Barrett actually, and the players, they really put in. Like, they may have played a 60-minute game and got beaten, and they won a couple of games in that period with Trent. And when you're looking at a football club and you're looking at the details, the little things, like if Parramatta came out in the last 8 or 9 games and got lapped by 30 every game, you'd sense a real problem, even a bigger problem than we have. So I know it's only a little thing, but I was watching very closely the effort areas. I know they weren't going to execute as well because Mitchell Moses wasn't playing and Gutho seemed to be playing a little wounded. But the effort areas, I thought in parts of those games were really, really good. And I know it's only a little thing, but I did notice that.
And you spoke briefly on RCG prior to a question posted by Craig, but he's been officially released by the club. And on the same day, funny how it works out, that it was confirmed he actually won the 2024 Ken Fournette medal. We understand the economics behind the call, and obviously there was the salary cap considerations and the fact that he was the sort of player that other clubs would be interested in. But can the Eels replace what he brought to the table? Because you mentioned that the depth props, the 4, 5, 6 stringers had been an issue already for the Parramatta Eels, and here we are losing arguably our best middle.
Simple answer is no. We cannot replace RCG unless they make an absolutely monumental move from left field of letting another player go and bringing, doing some manoeuvrings in that area. I don't see us replacing him. No, I think Junior coming back we've got another big body back on the field. The Junior, in an ideal world, we had Junior and RCG. So in that context, he's very, very difficult to place. He was our best player in 24, along with Gutho. Look, I don't know the salary cap numbers on this one, because typically when you let a player go, he's already got another club. And for example, let's say a player was on $700,000 and you want to let him go. Normally it's already been worked out that the current club would put in, 300 and the new club would put in 400. And that's therefore he's still getting 700, but he just happens to have moved clubs, and the club that let him go saves $400. And the club that picks him up can pick up a really good player on $300,000. So in this one, though, he's been released prior to finding another club. So that's the interesting part for me. It's because it's usually dependent on the value of a new contract, but he doesn't have a new contract yet, but he's already been granted a release. So it's a very interesting situation. Has he been granted a release and he's been, an agreed payout has been agreed between the club, the Parramatta Eels and RCG and his management? I don't know. Has he just been granted a pure release to go? So yeah, it's a little clouded. That piece I don't understand at the moment. But to answer your question, yeah, he's a huge loss. He's still, I think, a state of origin standard front rower, and I think he would have absolutely thrived under Jason Ryles. But sometimes, and I don't blame the club, they've made a decision, and I've been in this situation before. We would have had to, when I was at the Roosters and Parramatta, you have to let players go you don't want to let go, and they're really good guys. So I'm not critical of it until I see what the final roster looks like. So yeah, bottom line, mate, yeah, we will absolutely miss RCG. He's I don't think he's replaceable in the current market.
Okay, let's try to have a look at some of the positives that are there around the club, and we'll start off with the off-field. What positives remain in place for the Eels?
Well, at a very macro level, the Eels have a lot of the pieces in place, and this process started about 7 or 8 years ago with the club. But number one, they're financially strong and stable. The club, 8 years ago, had lost in 2016. The club lost $12 million. It was outrageous. There was governance issues, there was management competency issues, there was salary cap penalties and issues and fines. It was just a shambles. Today, the club is financially strong and stable. The governance within the club is very good. Look, it's a credit to the team that are there. We've got a very good commercial team there that's been generating revenue. Number one, we have you've got Jim there as CEO, who's very financially good, and Andrew McHale as our head of commercial is very strong. So, and the other thing, of course, that's number one. Number two would be the fact that we're now getting a lot more money off the NRL through our broadcasting contract. I think that number's up to around 16 or 17 million a year directly from the NRL. Well, when you only have a salary cap of about 13 million, you are more the grant from head office, being the NRL, more than covers your salary cap. Now, back in the day, that wasn't always the case. We were often getting grants off the NRL that were well below the salary cap, whereas now it's well above it, which means even before a ball's kicked, the club has that mental comfort from the financial perspective of we can always pay our players. No player is going to go unpaid. And that's a very, very comforting thing. The membership numbers are very strong. Our commercial performance with our sponsorship is very strong. So we're very financially stable. We have other things in our favour. We have CommBank Stadium. That's another plus for the Parramatta Eels. It's right in the heart of Parramatta. I personally think it's the best and most appropriate week-to-week rugby league venue in the country. Some of these other stadiums I think are a little too big, but they're great stadiums. But week to week in Western Sydney, to have CommBank Stadium, 30,000, beautiful facility, well located within the heartland of the Parramatta Eels. They're right in the heart of Parramatta, is an absolute huge asset. I think the new Centre of Excellence coming at Kellyville will be brilliant. It's going to bring the club together. So I think that's a very good thing. So, we've still got a very big junior league. I understand, there's quite a bit of work being put in the club on trying to promote and continuing to build that junior league. And it's very important we do that, because the AFL are committing lots and lots of money to Western Sydney. Now, whilst the great Western Sydney Giants they're not getting traction. They're not a great hit in the Western Sydney, but what they're doing is the AFL, I read an article last Saturday saying that the Western Sydney Giants weren't getting a lot of traction in Western Sydney. And, where you've got the home of the Eels, the Panthers, the Bulldogs and the Tigers. So you've got some real power clubs there at the moment that are dominating, as they should and as we want. The AFL said, we're not perturbed. We're going to, on a long term, we're going to pour a lot of money into that area to win the hearts and minds of kids in the Western Sydney. So we need to have our eye on the ball there. They're putting up AFL goalposts in Western Sydney at a rapid rate, which is not good. As it comes back to the Eels, there's a lot of very good pieces in place. The one thing I don't like to hear are the rumours lately around, people potentially challenging for board positions, because the club does not want to go back to the bad old governance days where Parramatta had very poor governance, very poor corporate practices. And because when all that happens, good decisions aren't made. And yes, Parramatta's down on the field at the moment, but many clubs go through this. It can be very cyclical in the NRL. You've got to keep a big picture view of this. The club's very stable. Financially, we have a lot of really good pieces that I've just outlined. So we don't want to be jumping at shadows and getting spooked. We need to set the plan. And I think internally they're doing that with, Jason coming on board. It'll be a fresh start for the club. So I think, there's still a lot of good things off the field for the Eels, but they need to keep their eye on obviously they're going to they're clearly looking at the football progress. That's our core business. You have to win football games, but in order to do that, you have to have a well-functioning organisation behind it to give it, number one, the financial support, and number two, the intangible support of the football club, knowing that the rest of the club's behind them. There's a lot of good pieces of Parramatta still. There's a lot of pieces of Parramatta that a lot of other clubs are very envious of.
And speaking of envy and touching on something that you mentioned just then in the centre of excellence, Eels been based out of that Kellyville precinct for around 5 years now, and they're heavily in the process now of upgrading that centre of excellence. Will the permanent facilities and the upgrades to that precinct make a tangible difference to the football operations?
Look, that's a difficult question. Look, at the end of the day, every major professional sporting organisation in the world is working towards, or they already have, a centre of excellence. It's a sign of professionalism. It's a sign to your players, your sponsors, your fans, that you want to run a professional organisation, and you want to run an organisation where even if the facilities give you a 1% advantage, you want to have that 1% advantage. Now, you could make a case, well, if they're all got the same style of centre of excellence, there's no advantage. That's true. But if you don't have it, it could be the one thing that a player's looking at coming to your organisation, and, they go and look at the Brisbane Broncos facility, and then if Parramatta was still in the demountables down in Parramatta at the sale yards, that could be a point of difference that they say, the Broncos have a better look at professionalism to me. So that is one piece of it. Look, the Centre of Excellence is a wonderful initiative. The club's done a lot of work behind the scenes, and I know this. And from a long-term perspective, you need it. It sets up the entire club to be as professional as possible. It allows your men's and women's programs to be together, along with obviously your management and administrative people. And that's one thing that's the good clubs really do. They have this one club ethos where no matter who's working in the organisation, from the guy that gets the Gatorade ready at training to the person that packs the jerseys, right through to Mitchell Moses, right through to the senior management and the board, everybody's part of one club. It's a one club ethos, and that's something that, I've enjoyed being part of in my time in rugby league, is clubs that believe that. Look, it doesn't guarantee success. It's going to be a tremendous facility. So I think it's a very, very good thing. It's, at the end of the day, though, like all successful organisations in business, whether it's sport or non-sport, my belief, and my very strong belief, is it depends on the people in the building. It's not the building, it's the people within the building, because they drive the culture, they drive the environment, they drive the behaviours. And it's not just about all the things they drive within the building, but if you're doing all those things right within the building, they're doing everything right with the most important people. That's your fans and your sponsors and your supporters. It's I read an interesting article on the Melbourne Storm of how they do things within the Storm building the other day, and it's very, very, it's a real selfless philosophy. So if you get it right, it's nice to have the shiny new toy, which is the centre of excellence. But again, someone told me a long while ago, and I really believe this: every business is a people business. No matter what you're doing, you're selling widgets, you're working in a financial organisation, or you're working at the Parramatta Eels. Every business is a people business, and it depends on the interaction of the people and the environment. You need honesty, respect, high standards, accountability, all those important things. And now it's very hard. I can rattle off these things, and it's very easy for me to say, but having been in sport and in a corporate environment, doing it is hard to do, which is why I have such admiration for the clubs or even business organisations that are consistently successful. And it doesn't mean they're winning everything every time, but over a period of time, they're successful and they do it the right way. So, yeah, I think it's, to your point, John, I think the COE is brilliant. I'm really looking forward to having a look at it, to get it finished, given that we kicked off that process out on a dirt patch at Kellyville about 6 years ago. So I'm really looking forward to seeing it. I think it's going to be a good thing for the club. It galvanises them further in the community, and they're going to be in that northwestern corridor of Sydney, which is one of the fastest growing areas in Australia at the moment. They've just had the metro is going to be running literally right through there, the new metro. All these things are very, very important. It's a huge growth area, so it's a good thing, but it won't win your games, mate. The people will win your games, and that's people not only on the field, but the people off the field that help the people on the field.
Speaking about the people off the field, we've had the first interviews from new coach Jason Ryles. Do you think he made a positive first impression, Bernie?
Yeah, I do. I actually caught the interview on one of the websites, and I thought he was impressive. And look, I think he's got an excellent resume. He's done his apprenticeship, and these days I think that's important. I think coaching's a very, very tough business, very demanding business, particularly in high-profile sports like the NRL, and he's done a very good apprenticeship under Bellamy and Robinson. He knows, people, I've heard the comment, he knows what winning looks like. Yes, he does, but more importantly, he knows what standards and behaviours under success looks like. He not only knows what success looks like, he knows what causes that success. And, I like this comment about standards and behaviours. I think that's going to be very, very important for our club to be competitive, because that's what the good clubs do. And that's, when Parramatta was successful, they made the grand final in 2022. They were driving very strong standards and behaviours and had a great year. So, yeah, look, I think, I was a fan of Brad's. I supported Brad. I think he did a wonderful job through some very, very difficult times for the Parramatta clubs. And I think the history of Parramatta will look very fondly on Brad's time at the club and what he contributed to the club. But, it's football. These changes happen. And Jason coming in, I think he's impressive so far. I like the fact that he's talking about understanding what the Parramatta community is all about, which I know when I came back to Parramatta at the end of 2000 from US to Parramatta in 2016, I wanted to live in the area. I wanted to understand the area better, and it was great. I really enjoyed it very much. And I think Jason was talking about the old fruit pickers from back in the 40s with Parramatta is terrific. So yeah, look, I'm looking forward to it. I think he's going to be a very refreshing change, and I really look forward to him doing well.
I got a bit of an unwieldy double header for you here, so I'll try and power through it. But Jason spoke about his apprenticeships under Bellamy, Craig Bellamy, Trent Robinson, and Eddie Jones, and what he's taken away from each of them. He also took it a step further and then talked about imprinting his own style beyond that, which I think is the right mindset for a new coach coming into the role. However, how rigid can a rookie coach afford to be in your estimation? And I'm talking about installing their new systems, their new cultures into the new club that they're joining. And that's all well and good, but can they trip themselves up being too rigid, trying to strong arm and shoehorn those kind of changes in year one and even year two?
I don't think so. I think the coaches now, they're very smart. They know what works and what doesn't work, and they can read the room when how players react to certain things they tell them. And I actually like his view that he's going to imprint his style. And quite frankly, most new coaches or new managers, if you're in the English Premier League, you can see what Ange Postecoglou has done at Tottenham. He said it going in, and he did it. He imposed his style on that club, and that's what he's doing. So I don't mind the fact. I actually like it that he said it. The key with any of these things, when you're a manager managing people, and that's what a head coach is, a lot of his job is people management. Wayne Bennett, Craig Bellamy, Trent Robinson, they've proven themselves as very good people managers. Wayne Bennett particularly he's a master man manager. The key with these things, you must be authentic. You can't go outside and try and be someone else that you're not. And I'm glad, as he said, I can't be Bellamy or Robinson or whatever. But you need to be authentic, because players can sniff a fake a mile away. If you're faking it and trying to be something you're not, players will sniff it. So, look, I like the fact that he said that. And head coaches, they want to build their own program. They want to instill programs and systems that they think will work. And the key with new coaches is sometimes, you don't want to tell them everything you know in the first 2 weeks. What you have to do is you have to build a program. You have to get players on board over a course of time. That's why the pre-season is going to be very, very important to Jason. The players are going to, he's going to build trust in them. They're going to build trust in him. So, look, I think the players will be receptive. Players are receptive to coaches and managers when they respect them. Jason's first job is to build their respect. I understand he's had conversations with, Mitchell and Gutho and all the key leaders in the club. I think, and he'll do that with every individual player as well. So I like the fact that he'll put it in print. I'm not worried that he's going to overdo it. Quite frankly, if Parramatta come out next year and they're playing a very simple brand of football, but they're kicking well, their defensive resolve is good, the defensive formations are good, that's what the club should be looking for, is getting that points against per game down to a level of what a top 4 team would expect. And I'm sure that's what Jason's going to do. Part of that that'll be him building his own systems, particularly defensive formations, related kicking game. And no, I don't think it's a problem.
Well, you are that sort of style of play that you just mentioned is part of the follow-up question I was going to ask you, because one thing that struck both Craig and I when we were listening to that interview between Adam Hawes and Jason Ryles was the lessons that he took away from his time with Trent Robinson, which he sort of filtered down to the courage and conviction to think differently. And without getting too wild with the extrapolation from that point, do you think that Ryles is the sort of coach that will be strictly adhering to the current metagame of the NRL, where we're seeing a lot of forward packs getting smaller, getting lighter, more mobile and agile forwards as opposed to the bigger, powerful middles? Or do you think he'll be looking to maybe zag when the rest of the competition is on the zig and find another way to win games?
Yeah, that's an interesting comment. I think, Ryles has worked at the Storm and the Roosters, and let's look at how it's worked for them. Both those clubs play a power game. At the Storm, Bellamy is very, very committed to using big men like Asoka Solomona and Kamikamitha to drive part of their forward and their go-forward performance in the middle of the field. At the Roosters, Trent has used big men, Warrior, Hargraves and Collins, and now Spencer Leniu, to drive that physical advantage in the middle of the field, which every club's looking for a physical advantage. So, and then you look at Penrith, and whilst Leota and Fisher-Harris, the biggest front rowers, they're still big enough, they're still strong enough, they're still tough enough. I remember the first half of the 2022 grand final, they were playing like 130 kilograms.
Yes,
So look, I think I wouldn't be getting carried away with this, the game's going smaller in the forwards. I think, like most things, you need a balance. And a lot of the great clubs over the years, they've had a balance: big men, small men, strike players, work rate players. I think there's still a place in the game for the big men, but they've got to be mobile, they've got to be fit, and those guys I've mentioned are that way. I think Asoka Solomona, he probably doesn't get used as much because he's a monstrous being. But I don't think he's going to And I don't think it's been proven yet that you can have all small forwards. I don't think that necessarily works. Canterbury, I think, would absolutely love to balance their pack with a really big mobile person. Like, I think RCG would be a tremendous get for the Bulldogs if they were looking for that type of player. I think they would like to get one big one. So, look, the key with coaching is you've got to work with the players that he inherits. Now, he's going to build, over the next 2, 3, 4 years, he'll build the type of roster, the type of player, the type of body shape that he wants. But he'll be looking at the strengths and weaknesses of all the players that he sees in next year's Eels roster, and that will drive a lot of his tactical approach. The one thing I do know is no matter what you have in the approach you have to developing the body shape of your forwards, he wants a good kicking game. Because that can be the greatest friend of forward packs. You know, they're struggling to get out of the backfield and they're on the 30-yard line, and suddenly Mitchell Moses kicks it 55 yards downfield. That's a beautiful thing. Or Matt Burton does it for the Bulldogs. And there's been a number of clubs that have, you know, they don't. What the missing piece of them is their long kicking. So back to the forward issue, I think he'll work it out. What I like is that no matter what composition of the forward pack is, you want to see those effort areas, the commitment, the attitude of those guys to work really hard, 80 minutes a game. I think that's the most important piece.
Bernie, the word retool was a very deliberate turn of phrase that was used in the interview as opposed to rebuild. And given what the Eels still possess in players, like Moses, Brown, Gutherson, Hopgood, it probably does hold some weight to use that terminology. Beyond the roster additions that we've already addressed earlier, if Jason Ryles is to execute the retooling of the Parramatta Eels, are there other roster priorities, or will this be a longer-term goal?
Roster management is a long-term issue, and you know, there's a, you know, having followed the American football, a lot of the big clubs over there, they come out and say, we don't rebuild, we reload. You know, they don't like the terminology.
No, it's got very strong negative connotations, hasn't it? Yeah.
Because they're admitting they're failing, but you know, whether you're reloading, retooling, whatever, the bottom line is you've got to have intelligent roster management, and that's a long-term planning issue. And there's a belief in rugby league now that the head coach is the all-powering person within the football department as it relates to recruitment and retention. And it's not true. The head coach has a critical role to play in roster management. But, you know, people think, oh, well, you know, Benji Marshall's driving the recruitment of the Tigers, or Jason Ryles will drive the recruitment of the Eels. The head coach is a vital, vital piece. I'm not downplaying that. But in good clubs, you have good people around him. You need a good head of football. You need a good general manager of football who understands the salary cap, who can work with the coach. My saying with the head coaches I've worked with, look, we'll never give you a player you don't want, but we're not going to give you every player you do want. Because coaches, by definition, they want a lot of players. The coach's goal is to win games next week. Your general manager of football and your CEO is sitting there thinking, yes, we have to win next week, but we don't want to burn the joint down for the sake of winning a few games. And when I say burn the joint down, I mean bad salary cap management that puts you in a terrible position with your roster for next year, the next year after that. And, you know, with your roster and your salary cap management, clubs, the smart clubs, are always looking 2, 3, 4 years out. They don't look 5, 6 years out. That's way too far. But they're definitely looking 2, 3, 4 years out. So, you know, it'll be a combined effort of Jason Ryles, Mark O'Neill, Ben Rogers as the head of recruitment, and then of course the overview will come from Jim as the CEO. He has to overview and make sure there's no howler suggestions around how to spend the salary cap or build the roster. But he'll have an overview role. But the key people in this are Mark O'Neill, Ben Rogers, and of course Jason Ryles. And of course they'll be getting, you know, they all get opinions from assistant coaches and everything. So, you know, I laugh sometimes and I think, well, you know, the head coach is going to be all powerful and he'll come in, he'll fix everything with the roster. That's not how it works. He's a vital part of that. But a head coach's objective is very different to a general manager of football. General manager of football has the same objective. He wants to win, but he has to make sure the club is looking a little more medium term and long term to protect the roster so they don't get in a very bad shape in 3 years' time. So that's how it works in the good organisations. Clubs that make emergency, like I know Phil Gould's taken a more long-term position as general manager of football at the Bulldogs, all the while supporting Cameron Serrato and involving him in all the recruitment decisions. That's the way you got to do it. They're building their pathways. This is the model Penrith built. Matt Cameron at Penrith, he has a monstrous impact in the recruitment and retention, but he works hand in glove with Ivan Cleary and the recruitment people. That's how it works. So I think, Jason, whether you call it rebuilding, retooling, reloading, or whatever, they'll be sitting down and looking at what do we look like in 2025? What do we look like in 26, 27, 28? And I think Jason's got a 4-year deal. So they'll be looking at their positional needs. I think they need to get a bit younger, a bit faster off the back of what we talked about earlier. If you're looking immediately in this year and next year, they need a good big middle forward at the appropriate price. They need a young back rower. I think they're looking at someone that can cover hooker, half, 5'8" as a backup for Mitch and Dylan. And I think they're looking to get some speed and additional personnel out in the 3/4 line, the wingers. We certainly need a few players out there. So it's going to be a very interesting process. And as I said, certain coaches have more power in recruitment and retention, but that's usually only your Bellamy's and Bennett and Robinsons and these sort of people. You can get more power as a head coach around anything within the building if you win. And the reason Bennett, Bellamy, and Robinson appear to the public to be running the entire football departments, which they don't. They're a big part of it, but they don't run the entire football department, is because they've earned that right. If you're a rookie coach, you need help. You need help from a very good general manager of football, a good director of recruitment, and of course the CEO helping you at an overview level. But hopefully that's answered your question and added a bit of an element of how footy clubs really work and how they really should work in the modern era.
And Jason Ryles did flag speed as one of the key assets or traits for both Isaiah Yongi and Zach Lomax. So it's definitely something that he is hunting to add to the team, which is good to see. Let's expand our chat now to the wider NRL. And apart from the top two teams in the Penrith Panthers and Melbourne Storm, who have been the clear standouts in what's probably been a bit of a muddy year this year, were there any other clubs that impressed you as a team on the rise across the course of this season?
I think the NRL at the moment, when I look at the NRL at a macro level, I think it's in a fascinating position because the management of teams, the administration of teams, and therefore the administration of football departments around it is getting more professional every year. And, I look at teams on the improve. I think even from this year to this year to next year, I think teams like the Bulldogs, Dragons, Tigers will improve. Now, people are going to say the Tigers, they're a joke. They ran last. I can't change their past, but I'm looking at their future. When you start with a spine next year of Coruscant, Luai, Galvin, and Buller, you're starting with a very, very good foundation. Now, I think it's going to take them a number of years to put the pieces around that to be a contender. But as long as they don't have any problems with injuries, if the Tigers move from 17th next year to 12th, because they have this spine and they're building smartly around it. Richardson's been around the block. I'm sure he's going to try and put the pieces around that spine. But that's a spine that a lot of clubs would be jealous of. The Titans under Des Hasler, I think they're going to be better. I think their very best player, Nino Fasuamala-Awi, coming back will be an enormous thing for them. I think the development of their younger players, they're a fast team. I think they're going to be better. What I'm saying here is I don't necessarily think these teams are going to win the comp next year, but it's a competition. Everything's relative. They will get better. They will improve. Then you've got three clubs I've looked at. South, the Warriors and the Broncos, underperformers this year. I think South will absolutely recommit under Bennett. The Broncos will need to recommit. And the Broncos were very much an evidence of how things can deteriorate quickly in competitive sport. They went from the grand final to 12th. Parramatta 2 years ago, the club was sitting here 2 years ago going to a grand final. That's how quickly it can deteriorate if you take your eye off the ball because it's a very, very competitive environment. So there's three clubs that I think are going to just they're just going to have a look at what they did, have a review, reset, and go again. And they're going to go again for different reasons. Souths are getting Bennett back, and I think the Warriors and Broncos, they're going to have a very brutal off season, but they'll recommit. The other clubs that won't, the Sharks, Manly, Cowboys, Knights, Dolphins, Raiders, all had very, very good years. I see them not getting worse next year. They'll be looking to improve. It's very difficult to improve because the competition is very competitive and there's limited players available, particularly the elite players that can make a difference. That's why the Tigers getting Luai, and not only Luai, but Taruva. They got young Skelton, Bulldogs winger. They're buying, very well to get Luai, an elite player, to come in and strengthen their spines and always. Now you come back, what you're left with is then this Panther Storm Roosters. They're always strong. They're strong because they're well-run organisations. I don't see them getting anywhere. So when you look at all that, the challenge for the Eels against the backdrop of all that is huge. But that's what the game is. It's brutally competitive, and you enjoy that. That's part of the enjoyment of football. The Panthers are an interesting one. They're awesome when they're on. They've got great players, but they've lost Coruscant, Kickow, Burton, Crichton, and a few other players I might have gotten over the last 2 or 3 years. They're huge outs, but they continue to perform. The Storm are an unbelievable organisation. They lost Smith, Cronk, Slater over the course of a couple of years, and they're still enormously strong. The Roosters are always strong. They don't rebuild, they reload. So what's that all mean, what I've said? The clubs are improving. They're improving how they work. It's very, very competitive. You can go from 5th to 13th very quickly from year to year in this competition. There's a very good evidence of this year. The Bulldogs played the Dragons about 6 weeks ago, and the Bulldogs ended winning comfortably in the end, but it was a dogfight for a while. And I said to someone, there's the evidence of a club, the Bulldogs, in the second year of the Cameron Ciraldo rebuild, for the want of a better word, under Gus Gould. And then you had playing the Dragons, who were in the first year of a rebuild under new coach Shane Flanagan. It was very evident. It was a year 2 rebuild team versus a year 1 rebuild team. The evidence to me watching was crystal clear. But next year, the Dragons are going to be a year 2 team under Flanagan, and I guarantee you, injuries, allowing for injuries and non-injuries, they will be a better team. So I think the NRL is brutally competitive, and that's the environment, the Eels, who need to improve, that's the environment they're operating in. But, that's the challenge. That's what it's a competitive environment, and looking forward to seeing how it goes next year.
So, Bernie, just basically on that, do Eels supporters need to be realistic, because this is next year will be a first year under Jason Ryles, and you just quoted some examples of, the Dragons being first year under Flanagan. So do we need to have realistic expectations about the amount of improvement next year?
The fans' level of expectation is always greater than intelligent management within the club. I think the management within the club will be really looking next year. Sure, we want to win more games, but they'll also be looking, are we putting the building blocks in place in our football team that fully supports the process of winning on a longer term basis? So, look, it's going to be very, very tough for Jason Ryles next year, but I'm really looking forward to the improvement. And what the fans at the end of the day, they just don't want teams who shouldn't be doing this, putting 40 on the Eels at Combank. They don't want that. Now, if we play a Storm or an improved Bulldogs or an informed Manly and we lose 22-16 and it's an absolute rip-tearing game and our team has absolutely busted their ass in that game, and they do that on a consistent basis, we'll win games, but we'll lose games against certain teams that may be better on that day. But I think the realistic fans and the management of the club should be looking at putting the building blocks together, making sure everything to support the football program is put in place, and then in the training paddock and on the field, that effort and commitment. I once read a quote from a coach in the US that said, look, everyone says they've got a will to win. I want players and people that have a will to prepare to win. In other words, preparation is critical. Your tactical training, your mental training, your physical, your diet, your sleep, everything that goes into absolutely optimizing your individual performance, and the collective of that is your team performance. they're the things that winners do. They're the things that Michael Jordan's, and I've read a lot about how Kobe Bryant prepared. It was just phenomenal. It was maniacal. He'd get up at 4 a.m. and go and shoot 1,000 basketball shots. If you really want it, you can do it. But these are all things the club's going to be looking for. I think it's not a fast burn to get back to the top 4, but I don't think it shouldn't be a 5 or 6 year episode. But I think next year, I do think, Craig, that fans need to be a little realistic that it may not be a top 4 year, but you want to see improved performance and accountability and commitment and effort.
What do you think, just moving away from Parramatta, what did you think of the first week of the finals?
Oh, look, I think it was brilliant. I think, and just it's a follow-on from the year. I think the football this year has been terrific. I think the crowds have been great. Membership numbers are up. Now, big crowds have been better. You very rarely see a bad game with a big crowd, because the crowd gives the players a buzz and the players perform better, and that further buzzes the crowd. So I think the standard of football this year has been terrific. I think that was shown again in the playoffs. The Panthers their first half was just gold. That was just a brilliant, intense, ruthless, brutal semi-final performance against a very good side. And I think the Storm, they made a statement against the Sharks. Sharks made a few errors. They fought back pretty hard. But at the Storm and Panthers, it's in their DNA. They know what this time of year is about. They know what it takes to win at this time of year. So I thought the standard of footy were great. Manly were very resilient. The Bulldogs were probably the better team for most of the game, but Manly very resilient. Probably the most resilient of team, because I thought with Manly this year, they've got a lot of points in them when they're on, but I wasn't sure they had the grit to match the better teams in big games at the business end of the season. But I thought they were impressive with their resilience. And poor old Tommy Turbo, he was playing on about 60-70% of fitness, but again, he was involved in the key play at the end. I thought the Cowboys were very good, but I've got my doubts over their grit and their defensive capabilities in big games. But again, they were very good, and they're a very dangerous team because they got points in them. So if they can get their defensive grit right, they can beat anybody. But of course, they're on the road this week, which makes it tougher for them. And the Roosters will play Manly, which will be a cracking game on Saturday night. And again, the standard of football has been brilliant.
And while the Penrith Panthers, who are looking for their 4th consecutive title, and the Melbourne Storm, who have been the minor premiers and outstanding this year, are the clear favourites to make the grand final, Rugby League doesn't mind spitting out an oddball or a smoky during that process to get to the big dance. So who goes to the grand final and who wins in your estimation, mate?
Well, everybody's tipping the Panthers and Storm, but to your point, rugby league often doesn't work the way people think it'll work on paper. Look, I'm not convinced they're the favourites to make the grand final. But I think I'll delay my thoughts on this till after this weekend, because I do think it's going to be. I don't think it's given that they're going to go to the grand final, because usually when everybody says, "Oh, it's going to be Panthers versus Storm," often that doesn't happen. And I go back to the late '80s and up to the mid '90s, where Brisbane and Canberra were clearly the best two teams in that 6 or 7 year period, but they never played in the grand final for various reasons. And I always think, that often happens. Now, would it be a great grand final? Yes. But I'm still not convinced that is going to be the grand final, because rugby league often throws up odd things. And, there's still some very, very good teams. The Roosters on their day are capable of beating anybody. I have no doubt about that. And the Sharks and Manly and Cowboys, they're very, very dangerous. The issue you've got is Roosters, Sharks, Manly, Cowboys. In order to make the grand final and win the competition, they have to win 4 playoff 4 weeks against the best teams, because you're playing the very best teams by definition in the playoffs. That's a really, really difficult thing to do. The week off for the Panthers and Storm is absolutely gold at this time of year, just to repair a few of the aches and knocks you've had during the year and to mentally refresh yourself. So they clearly have a big advantage at this stage of the year.
Well, Bernie, let's now wrap things up. And it's been an absolute joy talking with you as usual today. I think John and I always feel that little bit smarter after we have our chats. And really that's what it's all about as well, bringing the audience in with somebody who's been there and understands the inner workings of rugby league. So we really appreciate your time. But we wanted to finish off on something that's very topical, and that's NRL expansion. It's really looming big time on the horizon. There's the Western Bears, the Perth Bears, whatever they might be, that look like they'll be the next team. Looks like PNG has been told that they'll be the 19th team, which obviously means there'll be a 20th team at some point in the near future. So there are obvious considerations for every club outside of those clubs when it comes to list management and the frenzy that's going to be there with the player market. But from an administrative angle, what else changes for the established NRL clubs during times of expansion?
Yeah, there's a lot of things can change. Let's focus on the football side first. Obviously, the competition is increased for players. I think you'll see an increased trend, and it's happening already, but it'll increase where your best players, your top 4, 5, 6 players, you'll lock them down. You won't let them get to the market. Therefore, the difference makers that all the teams down the bottom of the competition and the newer clubs are looking for, they won't be available. Now, we saw when the Redcliffe came in, they had a few swings and misses, and they had the beauty of having Bennett and Peter O'Sullivan, a very experienced recruitment guy, driving the bus up there for recruitment. And, they had a few knockbacks. Cameron Munster knocked them back. I think Ponga knocked them back. So, it's very, very tough. That's only going to increase as you go from 17 to 20 teams. But not only the increased competition for players, but there's increased competitions for the better coaches, the better assistant coaches, the better staff. I would think that any of these three teams coming in would love to get a high-quality general manager of football out of a club that has a proven general manager of football, such as Frank Panisi at Melbourne. I'm sure he'll be in demand. Recruitment staff, Peter O'Sullivan, he's just starting at Newcastle, but the Dolphins got him up there, and he helped Bennett put together a very, very strong roster for a new club. And, even football managers that are a tier below general managers of football, but football managers that run all the day-to-day stuff of a footy club. In many ways, they're the glue football managers because they look after all the logistics, plan things, and they do things for the head coach. All these people, and then even potentially CEOs and commercial managers. You're going to have increased competition for good people that have proven they know the business of rugby league and they know how to get it done. So, and then the other thing to look at is if you go to a new market like PNG or Perth, or even if you put a team in the South Island of New Zealand, they're new geographic areas and they have their own corporate infrastructure around that, so you can get corporate support. But if you put a third team in Brisbane, a Western Brisbane team for that very fertile rugby league area in Western Brisbane, from the Brisbane out through Ipswich and up through into Toowoomba, again, they're going to encroach on the corporate available for the Dolphins and the Broncos. So there is trickle down effects when you do this. Now, it won't affect if you put a team in PNG or South New Zealand or Perth, because they'll have their own corporate market. The other thing it does is if you're dividing rugby league broadcasting revenue among 17 clubs, you're only going to be dividing it amongst 20, and therefore you'll get less money per club. Now, that'll be offset by the fact that the league will say, well, with 20 teams, I'm giving you 10 games a weekend. And not only that, I'm giving some alternative time zones to play.
The Perth side.
Time zone to, say, South New Zealand. Therefore, you can offer more. You'll have more of our product to offer to the TV people. You'll potentially have Thursday, 2 Friday, 3 Saturday, 3 Sunday, and potentially 1 Monday. I don't know whether that adds up to 10 games, but I mean, you're going to be offering different time slots. Therefore, you'll drive increased revenue. So the goal would be to drive increased revenue from the TV broadcasters, who are currently Channel 9 and Fox, increased revenue to cover the fact you're bringing in 3 new teams, and you're going to need another $15 to make sure that every team continue to get the existing amount of broadcast revenue per team. So look, there's a lot of factors to consider in this. I think the PNG one is an interesting one. I personally am not convinced that's the right move, but, they get a lot of government support. I can understand why NRL are looking at it. I think bringing in the Western Bears and linking them to the North Sydney Bears, who gives them, and he's been very strong in the New South Wales Rugby League Cup and a good participant in the junior rep programs here in New South Wales. I think that's a good feeder system, no different than Melbourne gets their feeder system in Brisbane. There's no difference really between that and what Perth's proposing with the Bears. I think Western Brisbane is an absolute opportunity in a heartland area of the game. The AFL, I mentioned earlier, they're attacking Western Sydney, a heartland area of rugby. They're attacking southeast Queensland too. They're putting big money into that area. I think rugby league, to shore up that area with a team from, say, Ipswich out through Toowoomba, a team in Western Brisbane, would be absolutely something you'd consider. I'm not saying you should do it, but they should clearly consider it. You'd get another South Queensland rivalry to go with the Broncos, the Titans and the Dolphins. Then I think New Zealand, like the Warriors, have made huge strides into the sports marketplace of New Zealand in the last 3 to 4 years. The All Blacks are struggling. Rugby league numbers, I understand, are very good for viewing of rugby NRL in New Zealand. To have a team in the South Island, which then would be a clear rival with the Warriors, would be, I think, terrific for the game. Another thought I heard the other day was that you'd have another team in Auckland, then you'd have a real Auckland rivalry, but not sure how that'd work. So I think you got 4 really good opportunities there. Bears, Western Brisbane, South New Zealand and PNG. But there's only 3 spots available. So that's going to be the challenge. But back to your question, I think we went through many of the areas, both from a football program point of view and from a corporate support point of view and a fair support point of view. It changes the dynamic when you go from 17 to 20 teams.
Thank you for that answer, Bernie. Indeed, thank you for taking the time to chat with us for a bit over an hour. It's always an absolute pleasure to have you on. And like Craig said, we always feel that much more, I suppose, better off and sharper when it comes to rugby league for having the chance to chat to you. We don't want to hold you up too much, so we'll let you go from that point. But looking forward to catching up to you again in the future. And it's always comforting to know that you're still following not just the NRL but the Parramatta Eels, mate. So many thanks.
Yeah, no, it's always a pleasure to chat with you boys. And yeah, the NRL's in a great position at the moment. They've got a lot of things that they can really build off and continue the growth. And I see a real growth trajectory for the NRL in the next 5 years. So happy to chat anytime, boys. Stay well.
Thanks, Bernie.